Welcome to part 5, where I will discuss the implications of parts 1 through 4. The first and obvious implication is that everyone has faith in God, even atheists. Of course, not everyone consciously acknowledges it, but they still have it. Therefore, any argument against faith in God is irrational. The person who does this has faith in God as seen through their belief in absolute behavior, yet they deny that fact with their words. To really drive this point home, I provided some examples of arguments that are commonly given against faith in God. Some say that faith is primitive. It was something that the cavemen invented to explain things like thunder or wind or the sun rising. But now that we have better, more scientific explanations, faith is not needed. Faith is intellectually lazy. Now that science has advanced to the point where it can explain pretty much everything, it's not only misinformed, but intellectually lazy to rely on faith to explain anything. Faith is an evolutionary adaptation. It was something that the cavemen invented to help them survive. It gave them a sense of purpose, which made their will to live stronger than that of their competing species. But now that we're at the top of the food chain, faith has served its purpose and can be thrown out. Faith is illogical because it cannot be proven by science or logic. We try as best we can to be creatures of logic, and faith is what stands in the way. Since it is so subjective, faith should either be left at home or avoided altogether. Faith is irrational because it contradicts current scientific reasoning, especially the idea of miracles. Faith is manipulative because it's just something that power-hungry people invented to keep poor people in submission to them. So to have faith is to buy into their evil plan. Faith is evil because sometimes people believe that the object of that faith does evil things. So to have faith is to support the evil actions of whatever that faith is in. Lastly, faith is hypocritical because some people just use it as an excuse to be jerks. So to have faith is to be a hypocrite. Now, all of these arguments against faith are important to address. Each of them has its own logical and emotional issues that I could take time to explain, but I won't because of time. However, where all of them fall is that they are irrational. Anyone who makes any argument against faith in God also believes in absolute behavior, which requires faith in God. The faith denier shows their faith in absolute behavior because their very argument relies on four absolute behaviors to function. Remember how in part 1 we showed that any argument relies on the absolute behavior of four things to function: the argument's truth, my moral obligation to the truth, logic, and the natural laws. So we see that anyone who argues against faith in God actually has faith in God as seen by their acceptance of absolute behavior. Moreover, their very argument against faith in God directly relies on faith in God in four ways. Therefore, any argument against faith in God is irrational on a very deep level. The second implication is that fundamentally, we are creatures of faith and not of science or logic. Belief in absolute behavior is so fundamental to how we function. Without it, our world would not make any sense. What would our lives look like if we didn't have faith in God, and therefore didn't believe in absolute behavior? We couldn't make any prediction based on the natural laws, so taking medicine or riding a plane or sitting down in a wooden chair for predicting the weather would be out of the question. And let's not even talk about jump roping. That would be straight up dangerous because gravity might shut off and the person might go floating off into space. And if logic didn't behave absolutely, or if we didn't believe it behaved absolutely, we couldn't teach math classes because who knows what 2 plus 2 actually equals, and communicating with each other would be pointless because the rules of how one understands things might vary. And if you make an argument with the format, if A is true, then B is true, A is true, therefore B is true, maybe B is true for you, but for me, B is not true, because logic behaves differently for me. Or maybe my conclusion is an orange. Who knows? That's what you get when logic is not absolute. Absolute behavior is so critical to our function, and yet to believe in it, one must go beyond the realm of science and logic that they might have faith in God. It turns out that the very basis of our function is belief in absolute behavior, and that is a position of faith, not of science or of logic. The third and final implication stems from the second, and is that a purely scientific and logical worldview is vastly incomplete. Under such a worldview, there is no room for faith, which means that there is no room for absolutes. And that is not even mentioning the other things that cannot be explained scientifically, like emotions or music. All three of these implications put major dents in the materialistic worldview, which states that matter is all there is. So, what can you, the viewer, do? What one cannot do is believe in absolute behavior and reject faith in God. There are four things that one can do. The first of which is to not believe in absolute behavior. It might be difficult though. One can start the process by purchasing a safety strap for when gravity shuts off and everyone goes floating off into space. The second option is to procrastinate, basically to not make a decision on such things. I would not suggest that because if my argument is true, then it has some implications on how we live, implications one would not want to miss. The third option is to destroy my argument. If you can show that the rational basis of belief in absolute behavior is not faith in God, then you have poked a hole in my argument and you can go on believing in absolute behavior without having faith in God. If my argument is true, then the only real option is the fourth one, which is to consciously accept that we have faith in God. Should you want to learn more about faith in God, I put some resources here that will point you in the right direction. Note that all the resources I put are Christian, whereas my argument only shows our faith in a monotheistic deity. From a strictly logical standpoint, the reason I am Christian and not of another monotheistic worldview is because of the historical evidence surrounding the Bible, but that is for another video series. Here are my references. That wraps things up. If you have an objection or find a fallacy, please post it in the comments and I will try to respond. Thank you for listening.